The best companies often start with some unique insight or intel that you have that nobody else understands in the market.
How are you working to make sure you differentiate and hold on to and grow your customer base when you have giants like Google?
Having grit is probably the single most important skill in making it in startup land. You gotta also be able to find some form of tranquility in the spite of all that chaos.
In this chat, Howie Liu talks about building Airtable from the ground up, starting as a simple way to organize data, then transforming into a no-code platform powering millions of workflows worldwide. He goes on to share what the evolution taught him about scaling products, adapting to new markets, and shaping the future of software creation.
Why Airtable? What is it about the table part of it that became?
Well, airinterface.com just didn't have the ring to it, so we had to go with table. Actually, in all seriousness, we almost bought the domain table.com. At the get-go. It would have been a weird lease-to-own arrangement. I think the ultimate purchase price was 1.5 million, and we actually almost did it, but because the owner of the domain was being super sketchy, and they were emailing us with different aliases and names, we just kind of got creeped out and backed out. Which now I'm glad, because I think Airtable has a nice ring to it, and it's got in some sense, more brandability than generic table.com, right? Table. I think in any sufficiently large market, there's going to be lots of competition, and usually my perspective is it's not really about having one-to-one competition that literally does the exact same that you do down to the feature level. It's more different companies coming in and attacking different layers of the problem. So to your point, there are definitely companies out there that are just focused on the interface layer, right? You could even argue Webflow or website builders or Glide apps, is another smaller one. They're focused on letting you build the interface, but then you sit on top of somebody else's data store. You've got logic builders like Zapier, et cetera, and some of these are pretty healthy businesses. And I think just when you zoom out and think about the size of the TAM for all even just B2B apps to be created in the future, that's a pretty large market. So you can still chip off your own corner of it and build a very large and kind of sustainable business. We started with the data layer, we're a very data-centric product because it was my opinion and kind of judgment call based on experience, my own personal experience, that the vast majority of value in these apps is getting that data layer right? And if you think about what's the most popular app platform in the world, Spreadsheets, right? The truth is there are 1 billion plus people who build apps in Spreadsheets without realizing they're apps. They have their makeshift CRM, they have inventory management, they've got contact lists, they've got kind of creative production workflows. Literally all of these apps that are not number crunching, they're actually workflow and data-centric apps, and yet a spreadsheet is not actually a very good app platform. And so we came in with this thesis that you have to be really opinionated about what is the corner of the problem or what is the starting point of the problem, your opening move that you want to play. You can't solve everything all at once, and as again, a 2-person founding team, later 3, and then later 5, we never had enough resources to go and just attack everything in parallel. And I actually think that the forced sequencing was really healthy for us because it gave us strategic clarity on what is the subset of use cases that we want to tackle. And it was the very data-centric ones. We were table-centric. In fact, the initial product, you just basically had a beautiful table, a database product that looked a spreadsheet with really pretty UX that actually had more robustness to the data structure you could build.
And speaking of kind of the resourcing thing, it seems in many ways you ended up grabbing a horizontal problem, but trying to kind of grab a thin slice of the horizontal problem. Yeah. I'm sure there was a lot of, you probably early on, there was a lot of pressure or advice or, whatever to be oh, can you do this, but just for, this specific workflow or this specific problem, but you chose to kind of keep it open. And then you had this whole templating thing that was very innovative as well. But anyway, talk a little bit about how why you chose to stay horizontal, even though, I think a lot of people, a lot of this quote unquote startup advice is actually to go quite narrow.
I think pretty much every investor we talked to told us, do not do a horizontal product and you're going to fail for sure. And we kind of ignored it all, which is not to say ignore advice, but I think in this particular case, I read later, many years later after founding Airtable, the Peter Thiel, Stanford class lectures, and I really liked
the Blake Masters rendition of it.
And I really liked the chapter on secrets. And the point of secrets is the best companies often start with some like unique insight or intel that you have that nobody else understands in the market. And therefore, that's why you are better positioned or better suited to go and execute on this problem than everybody else. If it was like a stupidly obvious problem, like there'd be many other smart people working on the exact same problem at the exact same time, and like, then why are you gonna win? And I think my unique take on the problem was like, it's true that in general, a horizontal platform is really hard to build and succeed with because like, you have very little repeatability around like a go-to-market motion, right? Like you can't go and target one type of person with one use case and one value prop. It's kind of like you are trying to be all things to all people. And then secondarily, it's like actually just really hard from a product standpoint as well to serve all of these different like heterogeneous needs, right? In a sense, like if we just built, let's say, an SMB inventory management system, we could much more easily just like solve for that use case, right? And hard code some things to make it work. But like the whole premise of my vision and kind of like, what I thought was the bigger opportunity was to make a horizontal database-centric app platform so intuitive that actually the comparison point would be spreadsheets. And the fact that spreadsheets are a very horizontal platform, they are used in such a wide and open-ended way and have like literally 1 billion users, right? I mean, like that's like ChatGPT scale, and have like created maybe trillions of dollars of GDP value, like, at least in the hundreds of billions over time. Like there's a real precedent here for this form factor. So I think like, the best secrets come from like defying conventional wisdom for a good reason. And I felt like I had a good reason for this particular defying of it.
How did you decide that you were going to be an entrepreneur, and then why did you make this big decision kind of early in your career to not have like a normal job?
I actually interned intentionally after college while also having this Accenture offer, which I'll come back to, like at this company that at the time was called Dolores Labs, later became called Crowdflower, but effectively was a very, very, very early precursor to Scale.ai. And they ended up selling for a healthy exit. The founder, Lucas, founded Weights and Biases, which also just exited recently, but like just great team, great kind of vision for that product. And in the 3 months I worked there, I think I gained more confidence that like, I think this whole startup thing, it's not like there's some dark magic that like some people have written in a book and like I don't have access to it. It's like I think like everybody's kind of figuring it out as they go, right? Like I'm seeing firsthand, like I think the company was 3 people when I joined them, and I saw them starting to scale up and like do enterprise sales and like build the product out. And I was like, okay, like, I mean, not to be like arrogant, but like I think I could do something like this. Like I saw it firsthand. But then second of all, like I landed on what I thought was a good enough first problem to build a company around, which was, at the time we were scaling up, go to market, landing customers, and I was like, the CRM thing seems to be kind of like an interesting space, and my first attempt at it was not Airtable, but like actually just building a smarter, lighter weight, like easier to use CRM. However, I did have this job lined up. So like to go back to that, like basically my now co-founder, Andrew of Airtable, who was a college friend of mine at Duke, had like, kind of out of the generosity of his heart, gotten me an interview with, it wasn't just like Accenture normal like management consulting, it was like a specific small division based in San Jose called Tech Labs, where, I mean, literally the whole group was like 30 people. It's kind of like its own little thing, like a creative agency or digital agency that would build like apps for other companies, right? So almost like a creative studio app company. It was like kind of a uniquely interesting opportunity because A, it would pay like a decent salary, and B, like you actually got to work on like interesting apps. So like I felt like it was adjacent enough to the kind of tech I wanted to do. So it wasn't like completely like just like a job that I didn't want to take. I ended up like doing this interview, getting the job. I'm like one of like maybe 3 slots that they have to hire people that year. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is gonna be amazing. I get to work next to Andrew. We get to hang out all the time. We were actually became roommates when I graduated. But then, like in this parallel thread, I'm like thinking about the startup thing and eventually get to enough conviction where I'm like, I think I really wanna make the leap. And again, like not the best handling of, kind of messaging, but like, I think I had like still a moment of like indecision until the day of my actual starting job, like, first day of the job at Accenture. The forcing function to me, sometimes you need like a catalyst to force your hand. The forcing function for me was like 3 hours after I was supposed to show up for this job and orientation and all that stuff, like the recruiter calls me and they're like, hey, like, are you feeling okay? Like, did you oversleep? Like, it's 12 p.m., you're supposed to be here at 9, like, are you okay? Are you coming in? I was like, just in that moment, like my mind like clicked or kind of like, gained the like conviction and courage to be like, you know what, like I've decided I want to like do a startup. I know this is like a really crappy way to like let you know, but like, negative 3 hours before I'm taking this job, I'd like to, quit. And they were not happy about that. I'm pretty sure I would not get another job at Accenture, at least in tech labs. But
I'm sure we have so many customers at Accenture now too.
But I think like life is about making like sometimes hard choices where like, at the time there was no like perfect evidence that like I could be successful doing a startup. I just like in that moment, I like kind of had to make the leap.
I always find the whole perspective about startups to be so different now than before as well. Because during this period, this would have been when, like doing a startup was not perceived or seen as like glamorous.
Not at all.
And these days it's like it's a much more popular like almost quote unquote career path for people.
Yeah.
Maybe in a bad way, right? Maybe like they should see
let
it
me
as
be
bad,
very
bad
clear.
and unglamorous.
In like the high school cafeteria, like political landscape, you had like the cool kids and the medium kids, and then the kids who were just like off in the corner, like playing Magic the Gathering. Like at this time, being a startup founder was like the Magic the Gathering kids. In fact, like often it was the actual crowd, including myself. But like, you're right. Like it was absolutely not a validated and kind of like revered career path at all. Like I remember like telling different friends from college, like, oh, I think I'm gonna try the startup thing. I'm gonna do YC, which like at that time in like 2010, still nobody had heard of. Like, I think my company batch was like 10 people. Airbnb had just gone through the last batch, but was still like a no-name company itself, right? Like they had just like gotten some early traction. Dropbox was maybe a couple batches before, but this was like really early days, both for YC, but also the general idea of starting a startup. And I remember like even like if you could go out and raise like a $250,000 seed round, like that was considered like a big milestone. Like, oh my God, like you might be able to do this thing, right? And so like just the chasm of like how many people, like the funnel of like how many people wanted to do a startup, very small, to then like how many people could actually go and like build something to raise like even more than 100K of funding, very small. And then, like it just was a very small funnel at the time. And so I think now like in a good way, like the fact that there are much more formalized programs like this that give you the resources, give you the community to not feel like you're just doing something stupid and like alone helps a lot. And also I think like the fact that you get to learn from like all these other people doing the same path. Like, I made so many mistakes, even going through YC, like just inventing the wheel for the first time at each step.
We were just talking at lunch just before this about how, starting a startup is so genuinely hard.
Yeah, I think to some extent, like the grit is like having grit is probably the single most important skill in making it in startup land, right? Because I think like, obviously you need to have like some amount of aptitude and just like have a good idea, secret, whatever, and then have the technical or like, executional skills to go and like make it a reality. But I think on top of that, like, my guess is like 80% of companies that could have been something much greater than what they ended up becoming or not becoming could have made it if they just had more grit, if the team had more grit. Because I think the reality is like, there's a few very select examples of companies where like they just were up and to the right, like from the get-go, and like it was smooth sailing for like long enough to at least get to a point where they were just compounding and they had a like ongoing flywheel. I think like most companies I know of, at least, like they had to really grind it out either in the beginning, the middle, the end, or all of the above, right? And I can certainly say like, at every stage of Airtable, there's been like some really hard times. Like, we've done 2 rounds of riffs during like the, so we had the peak boom years where we scaled very quickly, went from 50 people to 1,250 people. We had to make very painful decisions to cut that org down to 600 very quickly. Having to go through multiple rounds of like leadership hiring, having like different transitions of like the product from like initial kind of simple like data, Airtable, table emphasis, to like trying to become more of a full-fledged app platform, going up market to enterprise. Like sometimes those transitions weren't always like immediate and like smooth. So like, you could look at like the graph of like, our progress over time, and it looks more like a roller coaster than like an actual, like an up and to the right, like smoothly, right? And I mean, there's like the famous graph now of like you go through like the peak of what's it called, like excitement, and then the trough of like
Trough of
disillusionment,
sorrow, I think.
sorrow,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
The wiggles
and
of
then maybe you
hope,
make
you
it
know?
like past that, and then what they don't tell you is like there's more troughs of sorrow potentially. Like you're not out of it forever. Like there will be more. Again, I mean, and I think it's just like part of like the natural evolution of like any great thing, probably, right? Like, I mean, life. It's like you go through like good times and hard times, and like, looking back at, I mean, I've been running Airtable for like 12 years now, and like I feel like a very different person, 12 years in, and like, I mean, I would do so many things differently this time around, but also like, I just think like the toughness and the stomach I have now to like tolerate endurance pain is much higher than it was at the time. And like, there's this famous Jensen quote, which is like, if I knew how hard it would be like going into it, I don't know if I would have done it. Not to say like he regrets doing NVIDIA. He's like, no, I'm like glad I did it. You almost have to just like grit your teeth and push through it. And like, you don't really know when it's gonna get easier, but like you won't get there unless you push through it, right? And so I think like there will be hard times, and being able to make it through and like, continue to be creative while doing it. That's the thing, is like, it can't just be like grind it out. Like sometimes you need creative sparks or leaps to make a big pivot or transition or whatever. You gotta also be able to find like some form of tranquility in the spite of all that chaos.
And in your journey, because there's been a bunch of phases of the company, I'm very interested to hear just like from your own almost like personal development standpoint, like whether it's like skills or like your attitude, like what were the things that you felt like were things that you wanted to work on, or skills that you needed to build that you didn't have at the beginning? Like, talk to us about that.
Well, let me first say, like, the skill that you probably all have in having made the leap is like building product market fit, like building the 0 to 1, right? And your number one and probably the only skill that matters right now is getting to product market fit. And that is a very unique skill set in and of its own. It's something that like most people at large companies don't have, and therefore that's why like, Google isn't and Meta isn't just like going and like creating like 1,000 different like multi-billion-dollar unicorn companies within their company all the time. Like it's really hard, right? And it's also a very unique and like non-linear skill set. You can't spreadsheet your way or business plan your way into it. And so like, I think phasing is really important. And so in this phase, I would not, like I think there is a real risk to over-rotating to a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter, prematurely figuring out how to like scale your operations or like set up all of the things that like give you the pretense of being like a real company, but don't actually get you to product market fit. Like literally nothing else matters. And I think later in the company, you'll probably, if you continue to grow and like get to like the next phases, you'll probably end up in another scenario where you've realized that you personally as founders of your company have gotten too far again away from that like product market fit finding, because it's not a one-time thing. Like some companies get lucky and you get product market fit and you can milk that thing for a really long time. You look at Twitter and like, the product for a very long time was kind of like what they launched with. All they had to figure out how to do was like keep the site up and not freaking break, which didn't always work either. But like, it's like the thing was like 140 characters, kind of the same type of feed. They didn't even like try a non-chronological feed for a long time. Now they're really making a lot of changes. So credit to like the post-Elon like kind of version of Twitter for like really being bold and like innovating in the product even more. That's a rare case, I would say, where like your initial product market fit just like continues to scale for a very long time. I think more often than not, you will have to figure out like the next act for the product, whether it's actually a second product or like some pretty significant change to the current product, right? Like Facebook, if they didn't boldly make some of the leaps they did early on, would just be a poke button and a profile page. And by the way, like 10% of the entire user base of Facebook at the time joined a hate group on Facebook itself saying how much they hated newsfeed. And now it's like
they had a protest outside the office.
What's that?
They had a protest.
I mean, that's crazy.
Outside the office,
in a way, it's like validating that people care enough about your product that they're willing to do that. So actually, that was like the best like NPS score of all. It's like, do people hate you enough to come to the protest? Like, do they care enough? But yeah, I mean, I think like that product market fit finding, like I will say, like it is the thing that you need to just kind of find your own way to achieve. Like there's no book. I mean, you can read like Lean Startup and like all that kind of stuff. And like Andrew's actually one of the kind of like renowned experts of this kind of like, truly of this kind of like thinking. But like that being said, I think a lot of it is just like, you either figure it out or you don't. I don't want to say you have it or you don't, because I don't think it's like nature versus nurture, but I do think like you either figure it out or you don't, and hold on to that and make sure that like you maintain a role that you play, and you don't like that where you're always close to that feel of product market fit finding. Because I think you will need to do all this other stuff, like learning how to hire, learning how to do go-to-market if you're doing a sales-led motion, even if not, like figuring out how to do PLG effectively, whether it's with paid marketing augmentation or like, even just like viral tactics. Again, go talk to Andrew about that, like expert. All of these tactics to me are kind of like secondary to that core thing, and it's easy also to over-rotate to like just focusing on all of these other operations and kind of losing the ball.
The versions of your, with both eTax as well as Airtable that, maybe reduce some of the dimensionality of finding product market fit is that for eTax, you were like, oh yeah, lightweight CRM. That's how you just described it a couple minutes ago. Or if you're, like the fact that we're even talking about like Airtable and table, and spreadsheet meant that, there's a pre-existing paradigm. I mean, I think, there's a little bit of like a choose your own adventure, I think, on product market fit where, if we all sat around and we were like, okay, we're going to design a coffee cup. Like, I assure you 100% of the people here would get product market fit on a coffee cup.
Right.
Because it's a very well understood, like what the axes are. I think what's so fascinating about kind of these eras of technology, and I think, with AI, it's sort of, adding to this, is that when you have this new crazy disruptive thing, you can do new things that you maybe couldn't have done before. But then what it means is then you can amp up the market risk almost too high because it's like consumers don't even understand what you're working on at that point, right? And that's a lot of like what, for us as investors, we're always trying to sort out. You're like, okay, wait, is the way that we're just going to do everything is just through text prompts now? Is that like, is that the new paradigm? And then you see these graphs that look like this. And sometimes they're real, or sometimes it's just novelty factor, and it's going to die next year.
And we're the hidden asymptotes, right? Like like robots, for instance. Like you could have humanoid robots that like if the software layer actually gets good enough, where like it can literally do anything a human physically can do. Like okay, there's a big TAM for that. But if there's a hidden asymptote where like it's really hard to train the models to get there, like for other reasons, maybe the hardware just isn't precise enough. Like even hands are really hard to create. Like you can't get there. Then like there's a hidden asymptote that prevents you from going to that like breakthrough moment where there's an infinite amount of TAM under the curve, right? And so, to your point, like there's kind of two ways to innovate and create product market fit. And actually, Benchmark circulated this slide amongst their portfolios and portfolio companies and LPs, which is like there's two modes of innovation. One is outside in, which is where you are starting with understanding the market and the customer, and kind of like if you've heard of jobs to be done, like it's very jobs to be done-esque, where you're really understanding like here is the exact workflow that an SMB like brick and mortar shop needs to have, needs to do around inventory management. Here's current state, here's the current pain points, right? And then okay, we'll build some like commodity tech or like detect. The tech itself is just like a codification of that real world logic and problem. But like there's no real breakthrough innovation in the tech, right? Like we're not building quantum computing, we're not building LLMs, like we're not doing anything really disruptive, but like we're still solving a useful problem, right? And so that's kind of like de-risking the market fit with the risk of like in the coffee cup example, like everybody here could design a coffee cup, but like could you build $1 billion company from that? Like probably not, because like it's already commoditized, and like can you beat the existing competitors out there, right? So that's your risk there. And then the other way of innovating is like inside out, which is where you're really starting with like a cutting edge understanding of like what the tech is possible, what the tech is capable of, and maybe like what it will be soon capable of, right? So like you're kind of extrapolating the tech curve. And obviously a lot of the like AI companies that were founded by people in research labs and realizing, oh wow, like this is now possible, I'm gonna go build a product around it, right? Like I think that's a prime example of it. Or even just like building a product that kind of like, isn't like that great right now. Like I'll give an example, like I love the product HeyGen, and I think highly of the team. And like the first version of the Avatar product, it was like cool, but kind of gimmicky. Like it just was like not realistic enough to be like that useful, but you can kind of see the glimmers there. But they were making a bet correctly that the models would get better and better at producing high resolution, photorealistic avatars. And like now, like you can go generate a video with their latest model that like looks photorealistic. Like, it literally looks like a real live action video. And so I think just like some of it is putting yourself in a path where like within the time frame that you're allotted with your runway and with like the patience of your team, and this is where grit sometimes comes in, you are primed to catch the sale or to have a sale to catch the winds of like how the tech is progressing. Like Apple, Microsoft both caught the wave of seeing where microprocessors were going, and they saw the 8086 processor. They were like, this is the moment. It's like, this is gonna get better and better and better, and we wanna be on the right side of that technology trend, and we're gonna do it with, obviously, personal computing.
Given that it's so important to find product market fit, do you think that there's, especially as you've done these big evolutions of, Airtable, and what I want to talk about actually this sort of relaunch into like this AI, kind of moment. Is it ever something that you can like kind of hire for, or do you ultimately think that it's like, it's got to be the founder making these like decisions given like how critical it is?
So I think you can hire for it. Like, I don't think the original founders of a company are the only people that can ever come up with these new like kind of non-incremental innovations. However, I do think it's a skill set that is rarely bred or like developed in large company settings, because most large companies are able to just kind of like append more stuff to their current flywheel and not actually have to find new product market fit, right? It's a very different game, still very, in fact, arguably rationally for a large company, like if you are Google and you have the Google revenue base of search, like it's actually rational for you to say like, it literally won't make a drop of difference if we build a new unicorn-sized startup within Google. If we can just improve search revenues by like 1%, that will be far more EV creation, right? Now, of course, now like there's an existential threat to them, so they are making bigger moves with AI. But like, I think like it's generally hard to find that skill set developed within bigger companies because like you usually don't need to. And so, like, I mean, there's a good reason why I think a lot of like growth stage companies, actually go and start doing a lot more acquisitions to find that kind of like founder entrepreneurial talent that like uniquely has product market fit finding ability that can come at the trade-off of like not knowing how to navigate organizational politics or scaling or that kind of thing. I'm not even making the claim that like product market fit finding is like the supreme, like most important, like, we're better than everybody else if you have it, more that just it is a very unique way of thinking about building products, building a business.
Let's talk about, kind of the latest with AI.
Yeah.
I'm very curious first to hear about how you started to engage in a lot of the new trends and technologies, and then, making this decision to, like in the press and everything, even describing Airtable as like a AI native, kind of relaunch. I mean, it's a big move when maybe a more conservative founder would have said, okay, we have something going. Let's kind of just ride this to its natural.
Put some AI on website, how many times can you put the word AI on your marketing site?
That's right, exactly, yes. Yeah, some people maybe would have thought, oh, you can get a lot of the value simply by just marketing it as such without actually kind of doing brain surgery on the company. So talk to us about kind of like, how like that whole journey and how you kind of got the conviction to actually do it, and then also like what this decision really means for Airtable.
Yeah, first off, like personally, I've been very, like I would say, just like curious about new tech, like always. Like when the internet, like when I first got access to the internet, I was just like curious to learn about HTML, and like, when they added new like capabilities to HTML, like HTML5, like, I was really curious to experiment with it. Like, I did some like actually very, very like primitive like ML work in college. I like just learned about neural nets. I was like, oh, that's cool. Like I can like create a 2-layer feed forward neural net, train it on some like data, and like, here's basically how well it backtests, and like it was very simple stuff, like almost just like a slightly more advanced version of like polynomial like regression, right? Like, but like I think the concept behind modern AI was always very interesting to me. Like, so I kind of followed it from like a little bit of an arm's length, like when ImageNet happened, when like, kind of convolutional neural nets were kind of a thing, like just kind of read about it and like followed on it. And I do think that like, if you want to pursue the like tech innovation led path, like there's no deterministic way to just kind of like business plan your way into like building a great business there. You have to kind of just be curious about like how the tech is evolving and like, and stay up to date on it, because you don't know like when is the moment or what is the specific breakthrough that suddenly unlocks like a unexpected new business or product opportunity. So I've stayed plugged in, and like one way of doing that over the past few years has been, especially with the advent of like, the transformer explosion and Gen AI, and certainly like the ChatGPT moment, like I just personally wanted to like learn and both use all of these products quite intensely, and then B, like spend time with some of the founders of like interesting products, right? And more product than like companies. Like I wasn't as discerning about like, is this company gonna make it and be a big commercial success? Like I would personally go and do like small investments or just like, even offer like free advisory time to companies that I just thought were doing something interesting, right? Like, some of them like Adept, like, kind of like did not, kind of pan out as like big, like, scalable businesses, but others, like maybe Windsurf or Cursor have. And so like, I think I've just gotten to learn a lot from seeing, like getting to like spend time with these like early stage companies that have like some unique insight. And at the time, it seems like maybe implausible or it's not very clear how big this can be. Like Cursor, when I met them, like it was like $1 million revenue business. And like all the skeptics were saying like, oh, well, this is like commoditized and Microsoft's gonna dominate it and blah, blah, blah. And obviously like they've turned out to like kind of prove a lot of the critics wrong, which is great. But like, I think I just wanted to like learn a lot. Like, I've always had a belief that like humility is also another important skill set for a founder. Like, especially as you scale up and you might have like the temptation to feel like, oh, I'm not gonna learn much by spending time with like companies smaller and earlier stage than me. Like I've actually seen the opposite, which is, companies like you are the most exciting and interesting for me to spend time on. Because like you all have like ideas and energy and like some novel way of looking at the world that like maybe the incumbents have like literally can't even see. It's a blind spot, right? So I just try to like be curious and segueing to like what that meant for Airtable and our own kind of like evolution, it became very clear to me that like this vibe coding thing was quite special, right? Like, I mean, personally using Cursor and Windsurf, like, and like using Composer or using Cascade, like, and seeing like, wow, like this is not just like, I mean, first of all, like even just the output of a one-shot in ChatGPT or Claude was getting really good with the latest model. So like I remember distinctly trying like certain things like, okay, generate me this small JavaScript snippet to do this thing, right? Like on this website, like I want to paste it in the console and make it do this thing, or add like a new UI element, kind of hack inject my own like hack onto the page. And I would try it in like ChatGPT. Early on, it didn't really work. I mean, the context windows were really small with 3.5, so you couldn't even upload like the whole HTML file as like context to then like for it to use. But like as the models got better and better, like the output, like you could actually ask it to do a more advanced thing and it would do it like surprisingly well. And then of course, like with the more agentic, kind of composition workflow, it just started to get even better yet and build even more advanced kind of apps or workflows, including from scratch. And I think there was this tipping point for me where it's like, wow, like this, I mean, clearly like Lovable, Bolt, Replit, like V0, these products all kind of caught a lot of like attention early on because they're so magical. I mean, there's just no better way to put it than like you go in and like it kind of blows your mind. Like imagine if you had just been put in a time machine from like 2010 and like you're up to date on like 2010 era tech and like web tech. And then you get into a time machine, you come out and like you get these new products in front of you and you're like, okay, talking to Replit and like ask it to build an app. And like what it does is just so mind-blowing. And a lot of it is obviously like, standing on the shoulders of the model giants, right? The model's just gotten really, really smart, especially at like coding tasks. But I think the idea, like that's the kind of like tech-led innovation where it's like all of a sudden, like you can make this bigger leap of product, product execution, which is like before you kind of, I mean, the earliest versions of, basically vibe coding had to be more like code autocomplete, right? Tab autocomplete, like the original GitHub Copilot, because that's all the models were capable of, right? But it's like we reached this point where it's like, wait, even a non-developer can now type in an app building prompt and like have it actually generate something quite spectacular. And so I think seeing like there is some real magic there and realizing like this actually in a different way is trying to solve the ultimate vision of no code, which is like, I mean, if you literally just interpret the name no code, like it means that like somebody without learning how to program and be a software engineer should be able to build awesome apps, right? And we happen to be focused on the B2B app side of things, which I think is a very large market of its own right. But like even that realm could be differently and profoundly differently solved with agentic app building, right? So like it was very clear that this was like just a huge paradigm shift. It's not even like on-prem to cloud computing or like desktop to mobile. Like it's just like fundamentally like bigger than that. Like the whole premise of no code literally will be obsolete if we don't also make the leap of like going full vibe code. Like the experience of building with Airtable should feel like the experience of talking to one of these app building agents. In our case though, we have the benefit of repurposing a lot of what we have. So we're not generating raw code down to the line level where you have unreliability, context collapse problems, like security problems, et cetera. like we're actually composing the apps with pre-built no-code components at the data, logic, and interface layers, but then also augmenting that with custom code generation where necessary, right? So you want a really custom like interface component showing like a real-time map view with like a heat map on top of it of where all your restaurant locations are, you can do that, right? You know, in a sense, like for an incumbent, the trick is to really see like with a blank canvas what the like best new form factor for the product of your category should look like, and be willing to kind of like, you know, burn the boat really on like your current product in its current form, and maybe even like, you know, some mechanics of like how you go to market, some mechanic, like for us, like, you know, we now absorb inference cost into every plan that we have, including free, which means like, you know, we had like a very beautifully profitable business before, like actually last year we generated over 100 million of free cash flow. Like literally that's new cash coming into our bank account from our profits. You know, very high margins as a business, very efficient. And like, you know, I've made the bet, like, look, like I'm willing to eat into that margin to make every user of Airtable experience like this app building thing, right? And like, they're just gonna get like the implied inference cost of app building bundled in because it's so existential and it can't be like an add-on. And so that's like an example of like a strategically bold decision that like maybe a playing it safe approach would not, you know, you would just say, okay, you know what, like this AI thing is an add-on, you can pay extra for it, like, you know, but we're gonna keep our current product and business as it is and then just make this a second thing. And I just, you know, I felt like the whole product needs to be reimagined to just blow it all up and take the Lego pieces that comprise it and like repurpose them where useful to create the new thing.
Is, you know, in prior disruptions, when you go from like, you know, mainframe to desktop, desktop to internet, you know, kind of, you know, to mobile, et cetera, one of the interesting things is the incumbents are at a huge disadvantage because they actually have to like rewrite their whole, you know, UX for it. You know, if you're gonna all of a sudden need to support like touch screen and the small kind of, you know, form factor, et cetera. And so that does create the room for fast moving startups to actually, you know, go for it. I think one of the interesting, maybe, you know, major differences with AI has been that, you know, when you get mobile, not only do you get the form factor and all those things, you also get a bunch of new distribution channels. You know, you get mobile ads, you get feeds, you get this and that. But for AI, it's like we're actually still, you know, these are still ultimately like web apps or desktop apps or mobile apps. And it seems like it's something where if you're an incumbent that has like major distribution, it's much easier for you to like add on AI than maybe in the previous, you know, disruptions. How do you think like for, you know, like a new company or a new startup kind of thinking about that maybe has like an incumbent competing with them, like how would you approach that problem?
I think there is like this hidden, maybe you call it versatility or like multidimensionality to like what the models are capable of that really kind of defies traditional, like more linear logic around like what makes for a good UX. Meaning, like in the shift from desktop to mobile, there was some like good established, like by the time like a few years in, people had figured out like what makes for a good mobile form factor. It's like, you know, you can do responsive, here's like a good grid layout, like there's a common design pattern for like the nav bar at the top, like the little hamburger thing. And like, you know, there's a very like linear path to go take a desktop experience and change it into a mobile. And I just personally think that like the way these models work is so like non-linear, meaning like think about ChatGPT, like a misleadingly simple, you know, kind of interface, right? I mean, literally like that interface, like anyone here who can program like could build that interface in like an hour, right? I mean, it's like literally just like a chat box, like input type equals text, like here's a little Chrome around it, like rounded corner. Like, I mean, it could not be simpler, right? And yet like clearly ChatGPT is much more powerful than like most, you know, kind of static input text fields on a form. Like, I actually think like one of the missed opportunities or still like, you know, maybe harvestable opportunities for OpenAI is like, you know, they don't do much right now with their models to like suggest you towards like all the specific things that you can do with it, right? Like they're starting to give you like the automated suggestions at the bottom, and like Operator actually had like, you know, kind of more discretized like use case templates, and like I'm sure they'll do more of that. Like clearly it hasn't been a hindrance to getting widespread adoption because like people just try a bunch of stuff and like some of it works really well, and like there's enough there and enough magic and delight that they keep using it. I guess just to riff on a few tangible examples, like I mean I think of myself as like maybe like primarily a product UX thinker first and foremost, and then like kind of a technologist. Like able to like do the technical architecture behind it secondarily to support the product UX. Like for Airtable, we had to solve some hard problems with like a real-time collaborative database layer, but like that was always in pursuit of or in service of like the product experience we wanted to create. It's really interesting to think about like there are certain things that AI can do very reliably, especially if you like apply LLM calls in very specific reasoning steps in a more linearly structured workflow. So support is one example where like you don't have to have an open-ended agent like a Manus or like a ChatGPT agent that can like create any plan and execute on any task, right? I mean, it kind of reminds me of like AutoGPT back in the day. It's so open-ended, it's gonna like spiral off into a rabbit hole and like lose coherence and so on. Like a lot of the time, for support, you can just hard code it and say like, okay, every support inquiry that comes in, I'm gonna route it to like what type of support question it is, always look up the customer data and like transaction data related, and then use that as the context for a single LLM call, just decide how to respond, right? Decide what to do, and here's a finite set of tools you can use. That's one form factor, which is kind of the like very like finite and like almost like contain reduce the dimensions of freedom for LLMs to like this one more like kind of finite and limited dimensionality like decision step. On the other hand, you do have products like the Vibe Code products or like the Manuses and ChatGPT agents of the world that like are much more open-ended. And by the way, like they're magical in their own right? Or like, you think about like future of like AI browsers between like all the new things I've seen like Dia and Comet from Perplexity and OpenAI is working on their own thing. And like, I mean, that's a really cool form factor as well. And so I just think like there's not gonna be one convergent path to switching form factors as there was from desktop to mobile. I think this is actually a time where like the convergence of really creative product and UX thinking combined with like, understanding how these models work to then like exploit the newfound product experiences that are now possible. Like there's gonna be a ton of value to be created there.
Amazing. All right, well with that, maybe we'll go to questions.
So the short answer is we absolutely did not think about enterprise product integrations like from the get-go or like in the early days. And it was actually a very deliberate move. Again, maybe naively having read like Innovator's Dilemma, I believed that initially we would have to gain traction on the low end of the market. So small businesses, not like the big enterprises. Now, like the story is a little actually mixed because it turns out like there were pockets of adoption within enterprises that actually behaved more like small businesses early adopting us, like they were PLG, like we would get like these teams at Nike just like signing up for Airtable and building their workflows on it and like, kind of pulling out a credit card and paying. And there was enough of that across enough like large companies where like, sooner than we expected, we realized there was an interesting enterprise story as well. But like from the get-go, the key was just really focusing on creating like a low enough barrier to entry. Like we needed to get that product experience like nailed. And I actually think one thing I read this book on game design actually. I read a lot of books on design while kind of working on Airtable again because like that's like the core competency I want to personally develop. Like, but one of them talked about like how like if you think about games, I don't know if you play like Xbox games like or these like kind of story games like Red Dead Redemption, that kind of thing. But like they actually do a very good job of onboarding you into the game, right? Like it's not like you get thrown in, you just need to know all the like keys and like different moves that you can do. Like they kind of teach it to you over time, right? And there's an entry and a story to it. And so in some sense, like I think like focusing on that onboarding experience, which is not just tooltips, it's like if you really want to go PLG, it's like really being deliberate about like how do you get somebody in those like precious few moments, and each user will only experience that first time for a few minutes or maybe like 30 minutes each, but every user will go through that first time. Just like every person who watches a movie or plays a game goes through that critical first step. And so like really like obsessing about that new user experience, the NUX, as opposed to like over-rotating on like how do I make this scalable? Like I think that's actually what we really focused on early on and got the like early PLG traction. We actually built templates because we started to see what the early horizontal adopters were building. We would talk to them, we didn't look at their data, we couldn't, but like, we just made it so easy to get started that like people did, and then we talked to those people and then like made their use cases more reproducible via templates. And then only much later did we even start to think about like, okay, like some of our customers want integrations with like Salesforce or Workday, et cetera. But I would say that was like a very much later effort for us. I mean, I think for us, it was more that like after we launched and we started entering like the scale up phase, like in the earliest days of Airtable, I was literally just like, the only thing I was focused on is like designing, building, and like getting feedback on the product, right? Like, and similar to Figma, actually, very parallel timelines, like, we were founded in like late 2012, early 2013. We worked on the product for over 2 years before launching it, but it wasn't like in a vacuum. I was iterating on like prototypes, like the first version of it didn't have a real back end. We just created a front end version of it because we wanted to test the UX. Obviously, like the UX was the most important piece. Like if people couldn't figure out how to very easily and intuitively build like themselves on Airtable without reading a manual, like the whole premise would be flawed. So, we would get validation on that, like test it with users. Eventually got to like a basic persistence layer that didn't really do real-time collaboration properly, but like it was good enough to like test with like smaller use cases, et cetera, et cetera. So like we were constantly finding like what's the next milestone to de-risk the next factor, right? Like does the concept work, like from a form factor? Can we get people to actually use it on a daily workflow level, like with basic persistence? Okay, now we have like real persistence collaboration. Can we get a team to use it, right? Like what's the most advanced use case we can push them to? And all of this even before public launch. And I think that was the right way to think about it and execute. I think where I got like more distracted was like at some point, and Brian Chesky talks about this with Founder Mode, and like the reason why he got pulled away from Founder Mode and is re-entering Founder Mode now is that like at some point things are working, like the product market fit is there, your revenue's growing, and the conventional advice you might hear is like now like you got to just scale up and like hire a bunch of execs, and like your job is just now, like as CEO, your job is no longer being in the product, in the details, figuring out the product market fit, being attuned to like what's working and what's not working at that intimate level, but to like hire the people and build the systems that allow you to scale up, right? And I mean, like, there are tons of examples of like what those systems and distractions are. Like, I mean, literally just like walk around any big company and like ask like, 80% of the people like what they're working on, not because they're bad people, but like most of the work is like internal coordination and systems on systems that don't actually relate to like breakthrough product innovation, right? And so like, there will be systems, like you could have like squabbles with internal politics on like what is the right policy for expensing lunches, right? And like that will be a document that somebody will spend a lot of time writing and then get like buy-in from other people, and then like there's a lot of stuff like almost by default. I think the internal alignment and like process starts to dominate within any scaling company. And I think my point is like Founder Mode is really about like forcefully injecting yourself personally into only the things that matter. And by doing so, you set the expectation for everybody else to do the same. And so you're not feeding the bears, right? You're not like feeding the process and like the overhead, which is a very easy temptation. Yeah, I mean, I think on the product market fit finding, like there's certainly frameworks for it, like the lean startup and like agile startup, like type manifesto. I think they're probably pretty good. Like I personally like did more of like an intuition driven approach, which is like, I just intuitively thought about like, okay, like if the whole premise of this product is that like, it has to be so disruptively easy to use that like people can just like come in and use it as easily as using a spreadsheet. Like, okay, let's test that. Like, and the only way to test that is like build actual like UX prototypes and get them in front of real people and like have them try to like figure out how to do stuff in it, right? And like, I mean, literally we faked everything else because like everything else to me, even though I knew we would have to do some hard things like on the back end to architect like our real-time data store, kind of our own document engine, and there's complexity to that, like that would be wasted effort to go and spend a lot of time engineering that if like the front end and like the product UX like failed on its premise, right? So kind of like creating a sequencing of like, what's the first thing we need to de-risk, right? And like taking shortcuts on everything else to de-risk that thing. Like literally the first version of this prototype, like actually had like cookie persistence as its data layer, right? Like we actually would just like persist the data in a cookie on your client side so that like, if you ever changed browsers or cleared your cache, you would lose all the data in Airtable. That was fine because like the whole point wasn't like, can we actually get people to like use this in a durable way for like mission critical workflows, but just like, can we get them to sit through like a 30-minute session and try to actually use it and show that they can get it and that they're like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like I like this, right? But like I think you just kind of have to come up with like, what do you think is the single biggest likelihood or risk factor to this like not working? And then figure out the best shortcut to validate or invalidate that. And by the way, like in a sense, like invalidating it quickly and saying like, you know what, actually like this doesn't work can actually be a blessing. And you know, it might force you to pivot very quickly, right? Like I think like the worst, I mean, going back to the grip point, like the companies that I've seen like fail in the worst way are actually those that slow fail, right? Like where you just drag on like a mediocre product and it's poor product market fit, and maybe you have a little bit of traction, you just kind of drag it on for too long, and like it benefits nobody. It benefits you, it doesn't benefit you, investors, like blah, blah, blah. Like it's just like, you know, in a plateau. And so like I'd rather go and like quickly validate, is this a big, like, is there a big there? And if not, like, you know, keep iterating around until you find, like, in kind of like machine learning terms, like you're performing gradient descent, but trying to find the global maxima, not the local, right?
Howie, thank you for spending the afternoon with us. But yeah, let's give Howie a hand.
Thank you. That was awesome. Fun stuff. 3 hours after I was supposed to show up for this job and orientation and all that stuff, like the recruiter calls me and they're like, hey, like, are you feeling okay? Like, you know, did you oversleep? Like, it's 12 p.m. You're supposed to be here at 9. Like, you know, are you okay? Are you coming in? I was like, you know what? Like, I've decided I want to like do a startup. I know this is like a really crappy way to like let you know, but like, you know, negative 3 hours before I'm taking this job, I'd like to, you know, quit. And they were not happy about that. I'm pretty sure I would not get another job at Accenture, at least in tech labs. But, you know, like...
I'm sure we have so many customers at Accenture now, too.